Hi everyone, Teddy Baldassarre here. And in this video, we're going to revisit the topic of looking at some hot takes in the watch industry that you guys have as collectors. It can include different brands, it can include movements, topics, prices, anything that deals with the world of watches. I wanted to hear your hot takes, and you submitted them on Instagram as well as in the Facebook group. And today I'm going to react to some of the ones that were handpicked by the team and just kind of give my take to your takes. Now, before we jump into this video, I do want to mention subscribing to our newsletter. We have a whole series of written content that is being released on a weekly basis, new written content actually being dropped at any given moment, all the time throughout the week. Totally different than the content that we're releasing here on the YouTube channel. We have an industry leader in the field, Mark Bernardo. He was at Watch Time for over 15 years and is now leading our editorial content division. So if you want to get things like buying guides of definitive price ranges, different types of watches, also different in-depth breakdowns of model families like the AP Royal Oak and looking at it after 50 years, that was a recent write-up that we did. And then also new model releases, whether you're talking about watches and wonders, new Omega releases for 2022. You can get all of that and more. Be sure to subscribe to the newsletter on our website. Now beginning with our first hot take, and this comes from Anthony. And Anthony says, a watch enthusiast who doesn't own at least one Casio beater isn't an enthusiast. Now, I see this statement in general being thrown around quite a bit in the world of watch collecting. And I have to be honest, I do not want to pick on Anthony here, but this is one of my biggest just pet peeve statements in the entire industry that people throw out there as enthusiasts. I don't think there's a prerequisite to watch enthusiasm. There's no perfect watch that's you have to buy and that becomes the definitive reason behind you being an enthusiast or not. That doesn't exist in my mind. And I think it's also very strange how somebody else could try to qualify what is an enthusiast and what isn't an enthusiast. I think about it this way. Imagine if this statement was flipped and it became Rolex. You're not a watch enthusiast if you don't own a Rolex watch. How people would go mad and crazy if that's the case. I think this proves the point that even if something's affordable and anybody can potentially obtain that watch, it doesn't get around the idea that watch enthusiasm can't be determined by a purchase or what you have in your collection. It really comes down to what your interest level is at the end of the day. I am into a lot of different things. It'd be like saying, I have a fragrance channel now. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but definitely recommend checking it out. But you have to own Nautica Voyage as a fragrance enthusiast. Or if you're into Goodyear welted boots, you need to own a pair of Red Wing Iron Rangers if you want to get into that world. There's no such thing as that one watch that everybody should own. And I even think about myself when I was like 2019, 2020, before TeddyBaldassarre.com was a thing. I mean, I was not making money, really. I was investing back into the business and trying to figure out how I could scale things. And I sold many of my watches and it was kind of a scary time. But even through that time, I didn't feel like my enthusiasm for watches went away just because I sold my watches or what I owned didn't affect my enthusiasm for the just hobby or however you want to describe this little world that you're in or this interest level. At the end of the day, I don't think any of this matters. What you own does not determine the enthusiasm you have for watches. Now for our next point here, we have gray market dealers have all the right to do what they do. So how I am taking the idea of gray market dealers with this question is somebody who is buying, selling, trading luxury watches or just watches for a profit. And that's how I'm reading it. I know there's a lot of different ways that you can interpret gray market, but that's how I'm taking it here, because that seems to be a hot button issue at the moment. Now, I think about this on two fronts. When it comes to just the transaction itself, if you are somebody that is willing to pay a certain amount that somebody's listing a product for, and it's all done on the up and up, and there's no funny business happening with the product that's being sold, then those are two consenting individuals, and if they go about the process and have no problems, I don't think you can say there's anything wrong with that. But where I will say that there probably is some gray areas with the gray market whole sphere is when it comes down to the intermingling with authorized channels and whether you're selling directly there, maybe inflating prices, hoarding all of this inventory and trying to change the market dynamics of what the going price is for those watches. If you're doing it at that level, I think that's where things start to become a questionable activity, and you have to look at that. Now, at the end of the day though, I think the market is going to do what it's going to do. And the gray market dealers are only one part of the chain. You have to look at the brands and how they're allocating inventory. You have to look at consumers and what they're willing to pay, because at the end of the day, if you can demand a certain price in the market and someone's willing to pay for it, how can you fault somebody for trying to make money and an opportunity for themselves in that market? So there's a lot involved here, but I think when there is deceptive type of practices happening and kind of that intermingling with the authorized channels and the gray market channels and just kind of doing things out of bad faith, I think that's where it starts to get a little bit dicey. But if you're doing things with a good reputation, you're being honest about what you're selling, and somebody wants that product and they come out of the transaction feeling great, then at the end of the day, I don't think that you can fault that type of transaction at all. Next up here, we have I'm preaching to myself with this one because I just got a Speedy. The watch community's obsession with heritage and vintage pieces have stifled creativity. We need less new Speedmaster and Datejust variants and more Oris Big Crown Bronzes or Nomos Tetras. I know these big models support the bottom line of the big brands, but maybe shine a spotlight on your new creative pieces. They might catch on. Now, this is a topic I think about a lot as creating content as well as being an authorized dealer in the world of watches. It's really funny how people might say one thing and then act in a completely different way when it comes to acting with their wallet and their dollars. I look at this situation, even this question itself, like I'm not practicing what I'm preaching. I bought a Speedmaster, but I don't want to see so many Speedmasters. From a content front, I see a very similar thing happening. I like to cover all different types of watches, but at the end of the day, if you post something about a Rolex, people go mad. And then at the same time, they'll say in the comments, oh, I'm so tired of Rolex, I'm so tired of Rolex. But people still are deciding to pay more for Rolex and want to talk about Rolex more than other brands out there. This is the case for many brands. And there's all of these other types of models that are neglected as a byproduct of this. I think at the end of the day, the brands are just acting the same way that I would as a creator of content. Sure, I'd love to make a video about the Doxa Sub 300, but that gets 20,000 views and there's a limited market. As much as I still enjoy it, I can't just be putting out content that maybe people just don't want to see. They might say they enjoy it, but their actions speak otherwise. And I think from a retail environment perspective and how these brands are navigating this, they have to double down on what is working for them. Sure, they can go ahead and try something new, but then they'll fall behind the competition. This very idea is perpetuated by what consumers decide to do with their money. If consumers are going to spend, like you have with buying a Speedmaster, despite saying, I don't want to see the Speedmaster, you are creating this cycle. So I've said this before on the channel, but if you want to see other types of products and you don't want to see this stifled creativity, then you have to put your dollars behind where you see creativity happening. I've mentioned models like the Octo Finissimo and models that I think do push the mold a little bit about what a watch should be. Maybe looking at less popular brands and giving support to that than the standard, say, big three nowadays with Rolex, AP, and Patek. As a consumer, you have to put your money elsewhere if you want to see other models and brands rise. And that also comes with your time and how you're maybe looking at content. I know for myself, people tell me all the time, hey, I want to see this independent brand covered, but then when you cover it, nobody watches. So it's a difficult thing that you have to kind of navigate when you're in this world. What people say and then what they end up actually deciding to do. I think also an important thing to keep in mind is an icon is an icon. And when something is great, it is great no matter what. And a brand shouldn't neglect greatness just because maybe some people are fatigued and have a knowledge of that model more than others. Think about it from like a band perspective. If you're Led Zeppelin and you're touring, sure, you have all these great songs in your discography, but you have to play Stairway to Heaven, right? Just because so many people might be coming to that show because of that very song, or that's the song that got them into it. Nirvana, play Smells Like Teen Spirit. It makes sense. At the end of the day, I think you have to go where the eyeballs are and where the money is for many of these brands because they are businesses at the end of the day and they have to navigate this world. But if, as consumers, you can start to act differently with your dollars and how you're going ahead and acquiring pieces, that could start doing it if you do it at mass scale. Next up, we have a statement about Meca-Quartz. Meca-Quartz is an underrated movement. When it comes to budget chronographs, I take a Meca-Quartz over an ST19. I just straight up agree with this in most instances, or at least what I would say is people very much, I think, put down quartz as a viable option despite many of the logical reasons to own one working in its favor. Mechanical watches, especially these chronographs, these entry-level chronographs, probably the worst defensive case around maybe justifying a mechanical option. Look at these Seagull movements. Sure, you might be able to get one in like a $400 watch, but try to get that service. Doesn't make much sense. It's not gonna be as accurate and has way more things involved in the mechanism itself to potentially go wrong. Meca-Quartz are gonna be more accurate, they're gonna be more robust, also going to be thinner, so you have more case optionality of what you can pull off. Typically will have a sweeping second, although maybe not to the same degree as some mechanical options, but it does give you kind of that best of both worlds type of scenario. I think Meca-Quartz makes a ton of sense, both from a dimension set and what you're able to work with, as a manufacturer and then also as a consumer, where you kind of get the upside of the looks of a mechanical option while also getting the accuracy of a quartz and getting in a price range that typically will outdo the competition from a modular system like an ETA 2894, or if you're trying to get into a value, which typically doesn't even become available for multiples of the price of a Meca-Quartz. So to me, I think this is something that many enthusiasts need to think about more. There's nothing wrong with quartz, there's nothing wrong with Meca-Quartz, and I think it really does present a nice option at that affordable range. Now for our next statement, looking at the idea around bracelets. Simply put, every bracelet should have an adjustable clasp. So I'm on the fence about this one because I am thinking about from a manufacturing perspective. I think this really does depend on price. If you're talking about sub $1,000, there's just going to be limitations on what a brand can offer up with a bracelet. But they can really work on what an enthusiast wants and doesn't have to think about all these miscellaneous factors that maybe some other mainstream brands have to. But as you get into the luxury segment, I think this becomes more of a rational thing to request. As you get into, say, like that $3,000 to $5,000 range, I think these are just nice things to have. At the very bare minimum, I think micro adjustment should be on pretty much every clasp out there. Even if you have to use a tool, I think this is a almost mandatory thing at this point. People's wrists will swell up, they might have to resize it. Just having that quick flexibility to do that, I think is not much to ask, and it doesn't complicate the manufacturing. You're talking about putting holes in steel. Like, this is not very complex. The on-the-slide adjuster type of tool-free ability to adjust a bracelet, that is more involved from a manufacturing standpoint, and also does create challenges when it comes to just how a watch will wear on the wrist. I think one thing that people don't consider sometimes with this is when you have, say, like that Omega Seamaster Diver 300 clasp, if you ever handled one of those, you have this bubbled clasp on the flip side. It's very well done, it's milled, but that also is going to be extra thick, and it does add some heft to the wearing experience as a byproduct of getting that on-the-fly adjustment. There's some brands that do this better than others, but this is something to factor in. You have a whole other mechanism that's being included within that clasp. So that is one of the difficulties with this. But I think as you go up market, you can demand more from this. I think there's no reason for, as you get into that luxury segment, that you can demand this idea, as long as it doesn't compromise the wearability, because sometimes I just like that clean, tapered, just clasp. And if I have to just deal with simple points of micro adjustment, I can live with it. I don't need the on-the-fly stuff, but if you can work around it and still make it have that just slim silhouette, I'm all for it. And I think the people that are buying are going to appreciate you that much more if you do decide to do it. Next up here, we have watches have no business being smothered in precious stones. Doing so is the definition of gaudy. So for myself, would I own a watch with all of these diamonds on it and just encrusted on the case and bezel? No, that's just not my style. But to say that they don't have a place, I also think is not correct. Watches, at the end of the day, they're jewelry. And for many consumers out there, that's how they will perceive watches till the end of time. There's nothing you can do about that, and that's a part of the market that people just want. People do want that more, what you say, gaudy stuff, which I tend to agree, of course. But still, I don't think we can dismiss that it's a bad idea for brands to make product like that. If they dedicate from a factory standpoint, making watches of that sort, many of them sell, and for good reason for types of consumers out there. That's what they want from a piece. Now, speaking to aftermarket, I think that's a whole nother world, and it's very funny how people that typically are going and getting aftermarket diamonds just put on their cases and their bracelets, all of this, it's so funny because it comes in tandem with a thought that this is being more of a flex piece and more just expensive. You're kind of a high roller, but it's almost the antithesis of this, because it actually depreciates the value for some of these watches. You put all these diamonds on a Nautilus, instead of keeping it factory, it actually hurts the value of that watch from a trading market standpoint. So that's one thing that I think people do get twisted. If it's not factory diamonds, I mean, it's funny how there's all these subcultures like hip hop and things like that, that's all about being that high roller, that luxury lifestyle. And you're almost doing the very opposite of it when you go ahead and add those diamonds. So mixed feelings on this one. For myself, I tend to agree that it's gaudy and I don't like the look of it, but I also, from the brand standpoint, understand why they're doing it, because people are going to be people and they're gonna buy what gets attention, and I think that's a great way to do it, because they are jewelry. These are pieces of jewelry at the end of the day. For our last one, Aaron states, people who work in watch stores should dress more casual. So this is interesting. I'd like to hear your guys' comments on this, because I do think it really depends on the brand as well as the region that this is happening in. Say you're like in Miami or Florida or just a place that's more casual, you could just walk up into a store with shorts and a polo shirt and you could throw down and buy a $50,000 watch. And that's just part of the norm of the culture there. Maybe you're in New York and you're more used to people walking around in suits and it has a different type of clientele base, and wearing anything other than a suit might send the wrong message. But I will say this, I don't think authorized dealers and many just boutiques, as you walk in, create a very welcoming environment sometimes. Not to say that the attire is the reason for this, but I do think it's important to remember, what does a customer want? The image and how you present yourself is so important. I'm a huge proponent of presenting the professional side of you and just being, I think, an upright individual and really making that great first impression. But on the flip side, I think you do have to think about what a consumer wants. What I notice from many people that are just buying watches when we interact with them is they just want to talk to somebody that also is into this interest as much as they are. That's really what they want. They want to talk to another watch person, and they want to be helped in making that transaction more than they care about always having the most buttoned up appearance. They want to be treated in a professional manner, but what's more important is just how you speak to them, how you help them navigate that purchase decision. That, I think, is allowing that to move the needle. And I think that there's a spectrum on what type of brand we're talking about here. If you're a brand like a Tudor who prides itself on some of these like dive watches and tool watches, does it make sense to have a full suit, when you're selling a product? Does that match the brand image? Or like Breitling, who does, I think, some of the cooler boutique concepts in the industry, a little bit more fun. They have more of a lighthearted nature to them. Does it make sense to be buttoned up in a suit and a tie all the time? Or do people want to wear something like this, like a bomber jacket with that kind of pilot connection? Like, does that make more sense? This is actually I'm actually more into this topic than I thought I was going to be, but what do you guys think? Do you not like when you walk in, you just see somebody in a suit? Does that send a message in itself? Does it matter more about the tone and how somebody greets you? And do you find it intimidating as you're walking up to a boutique and you just see all these people in suits? I would say from a more casual type of consumer that doesn't understand the game of watches as much, or maybe your first purchase on a luxury watch, and you just feel like this really weighted type of feeling with that purchase and having to go in there. It makes it more difficult to maybe step into that store for the first time. I don't think you want to create that world for a consumer. You want people to feel welcome to come in, and whether they're wearing something that's more casual or not, that they could still come in and buy that watch. I don't think that's the standard currently in the industry. And for myself, I don't know if that's always the best idea. Keep in mind image. Of course, you want to have the right perception in the marketplace from a consumer, but at the same time, you don't want to distance that consumer. So I don't know what that happy medium is, but maybe this is something that the industry needs to rethink. But all right, guys, that is all I have for this video, reacting to some of your takes. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. That's also a great indicator that you want to see more of this, because we certainly could do a lot more of this in the future. There are plenty of other things to talk about when it comes to the world of watches. Also, be sure to check out the newsletter, TeddyBaldassarre.com, full authorized dealer of 30 brands, quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support, and a full factory warranty for all the new products that we carry. If you want to stay up to date with the content as well, be sure to follow on Instagram and see some great photos of watches in the process. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.